another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. And today, oh, what a treat we have in store, not only for ourselves, but also for you, dear listeners, because we go back to when the world was young. We go back to June the 30th, 1998, and an epic World Cup encounter between England and Argentina with our very special guest, an old friend. Step on down, Theo Delaney.
Hello, Tim. How you doing?
I'm very well. All the better to be in your company, and all the better to have this game and this era to chew over. Now, you chose this fine match. What's it mean to you?
Well, I would say it's the best international football match by miles that I've ever attended in terms of sheer drama and compulsive entertainment.
Theo Delaney was there in St Etienne.
Yeah.
Only 30,000 in a small stadium. Surely the game deserved a bigger stadium. But in that, along with Mick Jagger, was Theo Delaney.
Yeah, old Mick Jagger was there, yeah. And I only actually went on impulse on the morning of the game. My friend, my great old
Did someone
mate,
give you flowers?
not that kind of impulse, but I had my mate we'd been talking about it. I'd hopped over and got the sleeper train down to Marseille for the Tunisia, the opening game of the tournament, where a full-scale riot had taken place. I don't know if you remember. It was on all the news all over the world. Tunisians and English supporters in Marseille smashing shit out of each other, but England won that quite straightforwardly, as you would expect, and they got through the group. I had a bit of a hiccup against Romania, but they got through the group okay. And then on the morning of this game, which was such a colossal game on paper, never mind what transpired. I mean, it was, when you can look at the context of it after 1966 and the animals jibe that Ramsey made against Argentina, and then the small matter of a war that took place in 82. And then, of course, I think we're going to say this is one of the most famous World Cup games ever, but certainly the 86 encounter possibly remains even more famous for the hand of God and then the goal of the century from Maradona. So this game, as you woke up that morning in June 1998, you just thought, I'm not really sure I can not go to this game. This is a game I absolutely have to be at. And in those days, I was very free. I had limitless freedom. I had no children. I was not yet married. I was to be married 2 months later. And everything, all my decisions were entirely made whimsically and in whatever I fancied doing. So this mate of mine, Jason. Capriciously, exactly.
Yeah.
And this guy, Jason, my mate, phoned up and said, do you think we should just go? And I said, yeah, I think we should just go. So we immediately contacted some ticket touts that had quite high profile, and they said, yeah, we'll sort you out a couple of tickets, don't worry about that. Yeah, we'll meet you. Our guy will meet you there. He's meeting a few people. So we said, so that was fine. So we made that deal. Then we looked into flights. We couldn't get into Lyon or anywhere, couldn't get nearer than Geneva. So we flew into Geneva in Switzerland, jumped into a hire car, and basically just drove hell for leather. Just about got there about maybe an hour or so before kickoff. Went to the meeting point to meet the touts. Of course, said, no sign of them. No sign of them at all. They'd taken the credit card payment, but had somehow I don't know if they got lost on the way to the stadium. I don't know. So we're like, oh no, we've come all this way. We'd booked a hotel back on the border. That was the nearest hotel we could get. So we knew we had somewhere to sleep. So what we had to do was go to every cash point in the town, get as much cash out as possible, and then start negotiating with the local French people who, in that World Cup, it was well known that they'd released a lot of tickets early to the local populations as a way of saying, look, it's going to be a bit of a hassle. It's going to be a World Cup, but you buy the tickets now, I guarantee there's money in this for you. So they're just very ordinary people, members of the public walking around with tickets. So we ended up buying 2 tickets. It was risky. I mean, we didn't even know. There could have been forgeries. We didn't really know where in the ground they were, but they turned out to be
forgeries, as I believe they're called.
Yeah, they could have been le forgery, but it was fine. They were great tickets. They were like more or less on the halfway line and just a little way up the upper tier of this, as you say, quite small stadium. So we got in there with about 5 minutes to go. And think,
do you regret? Because, and one of the great things with Argentina games is the atmosphere that the crowds, the way that they call the team onto the field, the thing that they create. And at that time, the dollar and the Argentine peso are 1 for 1. So they can do it. They can travel. No,
Right.
they're rich.
Right.
So do you regret not being there for the build-up?
I suppose so. I'd never thought of that before. I hadn't thought of it. But yeah, now that you say it, I mean, it was the atmosphere generally. I remember, I mean, this was the perfect game. As I say, this was the perfect, apart from, taking away any partisanship. If you were neutral and you wanted a World Cup game in history, this is in the top handful, I think. And one of the reasons was that the atmosphere was incredible. It was absolutely intense throughout because the play and the game itself was so intense. The atmosphere never seemed to be a lull. Even at half time, it just seemed so completely electric throughout the break,
It's like, when cricket is great, when it's at its best, you don't notice the interval between the balls, do you?
No, because you're never off the edge of your seat, basically. And that's what it was like. This night, you were either fully tensed up on the edge of your seat, or on one or two occasions, you're going berserk because something enormous has happened, So, when you're sitting there, but of course, as we got in there, we took our seats. You don't know what to expect. It could have been anything could happen. That's why we love sport. That's why we love football. It could have been a crappy old 0-0.
You're obviously making a huge commitment here to follow England. You've gone to Tunisia, the Tunisia game, and what did you feel about this specific team? What was your relationship going into the World Cup? What was your relationship with this England team?
Well, it's a strange thing. People have said it. I don't know if it's to do with the time of life, but at that time I was a huge England fan, and I'd been to, several games at Euro 96. I'd been to Rome for that incredible qualifier, the last qualifier where England needed a point
when Gaza got us over the line.
Yeah, and we needed a point in Rome, and we hung on. It was incredibly dramatic, one of the greatest 0-0 draws that you've ever seen. So I was very invested in England as a thing, but also that you ask about that particular team. I'm a Tottenham fan, and I'm a lifelong big Tottenham fan. At that stage, I'd had a season ticket for a long time, and I still have it to this day. And so that team, because of Glenn Hoddle and Sol Campbell in particular, that team meant a lot to me, because Glenn Hoddle was and probably remains my favourite ever Tottenham player, and is arguably the greatest, most iconic Tottenham player of them all. And Sol Campbell at that time was the greatest Tottenham player. And he wasn't just our best player. He was our captain, and he'd come through the ranks. He was one of our own, as we later sang about Harry Kane. So those two things made it even bigger. And also, it was a great team. Darren Anderton. I feel awful for missing him out. But yeah, Darren Anderton. And Sheringham was there as well, of course. Yeah. Sheringham was on the bench. We had, so...
He lost his place to a certain teenager,
a certain kid, a child. It must have been so galling for him, because Sheringham was such a good player. There weren't many players who could have got him out of any team. But of course, Owen was extremely special. No, I love that team, and I love the way they played. I love the way they were set up, and so I was fully invested. Yeah.
For me, this was really strange, because I've been in Brazil at this point for 4 years. And during the course of that, first time I went to Argentina was the start of 96, when they were beginning to build their under-23 side. And it's that side essentially that's playing England now. Right. So I'd seen that side kind of grow up, right from the start. Now, Passarella is the coach. Mm. He's taken over from after the 94 World Cup, where Maradona gets kicked out. And that kind of confirms, in Passarella's mind, everything that he thought about the Maradona era. When they went to the 86 World Cup, Passarella is the captain.
Okay. Yeah.
And he loses his spot as captain to the Maradona game. Maradona becomes the captain of the team.
Right.
And he not only loses his place as captain, he loses his place in the team, because he is throwing up all over the place, and everything is coming out at both ends.
Right.
And to this day, Passarella suspects that the Maradona gang poisoned him.
Wow.
Argentina is freaky deaky, man.
Wow.
So,
oh my God.
And then and there's conflict between Maradona and Passarella over the lifestyle thing, because, Passarella is quite old school, traditional. And so when Passarella comes in 94 as coach, he's going to clean it up. So all of the long hair, that goes. The long-haired weirdos for him, that's all connected with the drug taking and the general level of indiscipline.
Right.
And look at this team. Veron is the symbol of it. The shaven head. So I've seen this team grow and grow and grow. And initially, Argentina struggled in qualification. Then they brought the kids in. They brought Ortega and Veron and so on. And then they breezed qualification. And you could see something. They were, I think, a more consolidated side than England were at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I came back for the World Cup just to try and pick up work here and there. And it went very well for me. And one of the first things I did on English TV was for the BBC. It was BBC World, previewing this game. And I'm explaining that this is going to be a terrific game. These are two really good sides, but I think Argentina are a little bit further down the line, a little bit more consolidated. And I remember saying, only a fool is going to predict the outcome of this game. That's why I'm going to go for Argentina. And they liked that line, and that kind of got me back. You know what I mean? So that was so. I'm watching this in a way, knowing the Argentina team a little bit better than I knew the England team.
Right.
And from an England perspective, deeply lamenting the fact that Venables is no longer the coach, which I think is absolutely crucial.
Right.
Did you feel that in any way? I know you've got the idolatry for Hoddle as a player who has.
Yeah.
But do you feel that we took a step backward when Venables resigned and Hoddle came in?
Yeah. I mean, Hoddle, when he got the job, was regarded as the great young up-and-coming manager in English football. He'd done a really great job at Chelsea, and he seemed like he was innovative tactically. And lots of people even say to this day that the tactics that tactically he was quite sophisticated, Hoddle, and that team played well because of a lot of decisions he made. On the other hand, his man management was has always been questioned. And I don't know if you've seen, it's great actually, because it's very relevant to this, but the Beckham documentary that's out at the moment on Netflix, this game, of course, gets a lot of...
What is this Netflix of which you speak? I'm 58.
This film's good. It's like a 3 or 4 part documentary, which I didn't want to see because I thought, this will just be a puff piece. This will be Beckham's people making an ad for him. And it is his people. He's obviously had Final Cut, but it's really well made. And there's 2 great things about it. One, they've got all the best. They've got great archive, which is obviously crucial, and there's loads of it. And 2, they've got great present day interviewees. So they've got people like Ferguson. They've got Simeone. They've got, all of his Man United teammates, all of his Real Madrid teammates and everything. But one person who is not in it and who comes
Rebecca
out of it,
Lewis.
she certainly mentioned.
Hang on a minute. See, rigid man management. If we were Glenn Hoddle, we'd be saying, turn up late, you can't come in. But because we're more Terry Venables, and we will make allowances for talent.
Yeah.
Welcome on board, Dotun Adebayo. How are you, mate?
I'm very well, thank you very much. It's almost as if I've been here since the very beginning. That's what it feels like, Anyway, don't ask, please. Don't ask. Okay. Apologies, Theo.
No problem.
Don't ask. At some point, I'll reveal all in my latest memoirs. Okay.
I'll look forward to that.
Yeah, we're gonna need a part 2. Lionel Jeffries part 2.
Well, I was coming to that. I was going to say to Theo, it's right here. See all these boxes?
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah.
Here's one that I made earlier.
He's taken the unorthodox decision to name his autobiography after a lamentably forgotten 1950s and 60s English actor.
Yeah.
I love the cover. The
Thank
screen.
You.
Radio Dotun. Love it.
Thank you. That's what Effries means. A load of fuckeries, yeah. A load of bollocks. Anyway, let's get back to you. I know I've missed a lot
Beckham
of this
and the man
conversation.
management.
Yeah, we're talking about Beckham. Yeah.
The thing is, in this film, Hoddle comes across very bad. He's conspicuous by his absence among the interviewees, and he gets a terrible slagging from Beckham does it almost by implication, but the rest of them, Posh, Spice, and his mum and dad, absolutely slaughter him. And actually, if you think back, even at the time, it seemed weird what he was doing, because he basically had questioned the merits of Beckham and Owen in the early stages of this World Cup and in the build. He'd actually said at one point, "Yeah, Owen, he's a good lad, he's a good player, but I wouldn't call him a natural finisher." You're like, what? And Beckham, much like Ferguson, these were strange, funny times. They didn't like his showbiz antics. They didn't like that he was always on the front page of the tabloids, that he was hanging out with. Instead of saying, yeah, well, putting that to one side, is he any good? Which he absolutely was. I mean, I don't think this was his finest night, but even leaving aside the. But then again, you know, I think he had to squeeze him in the end in the team. There's so much public, because he didn't pick him for the first two games, and he'd squeezed him into the game they had to win against Colombia, and he'd scored. And the guy he was supposedly going to replace but didn't, because he kept him in as well, Anderton, scored the other goal. So suddenly he's in the team for. So to get back to your point, would we have been better under Venables? Maybe. I don't know if we'd have been tactically better, but he's
Venables
a better
wouldn't have lost Gascoigne as well as a man manager.
Yeah,
Venables wouldn't have lost that, would he?
Yeah, no.
And imagine if we'd have had Gascoigne.
Yeah, but was Gascoigne actually spent at that point? I don't know.
He qualified us.
Yeah,
and then it seems that things got a little bit out of control. But I think Venables would have had his hand on the tiller with that one.
Yeah. Quite right, quite possibly. I had Gary Mabbott the other day on the Spurs show, and he played under 10 Tottenham managers. And I was talking about Ange Postecoglou, and I said, what makes a manager great? And he said, man management. They all know the tactics. It's man management. And I said, you had 10 managers. Who was the best? And he didn't even, pause for a split second. He said Terry Venables. So, yeah, maybe Venables would have got us further. And Venables, of course, he didn't lose, because he wasn't fired for any on-pitch reasons. He went because of off-pitch.
Well, no, it was his decision, wasn't it? You wonder what might have happened, because I think he knew that there was some stuff coming down the line that may not have reflected on him in the most positive light. But I still feel it's a shame that he didn't stick it and ride that storm and try and separate his financial activities and his business activities from his role as a football coach, because I really wonder whether that would have made a difference in 98.
Yeah. I mean, the players were there, that's for sure. I mean, you look at that. Actually, I was looking at the lineups earlier. I mean, both teams. Obviously, that was a great vintage England team, but you look at that Argentina team, you're talking about what a good team it was and how it had come through, and how some players have been jettisoned because of Passarella's, slightly conservative views. But how many times can you look back 25 years at an opposition team in a World Cup and know them all? I mean, I remember that all those Argentinian players remain, names that you remember because they were so good.
The only area of the team that you'd say, well, is the defensive line, and this, I think, is fundamental to this game, because an Argentina can really play, and they come out and they really making the ball fizz.
Yeah,
but the thing that takes the game away from them for a while is, blimey, it looks as if they haven't prepared for Michael Owen. They don't know Michael Owen.
Yeah,
and he tears them to pieces.
Yeah,
and in the end, they kind of find a.
It's pace, isn't it? That kills them.
So in the end, they kind of find a way, because remember, Passarella was a fantastic defender.
Yeah.
So on the hoof, they're thinking, how on earth? So in the end, it becomes, we're going to stop him higher up the field. We're not going to let him turn. Mm-hmm. But by this time, they're already 2-1 down. And he just terrifies Ayala, absolutely terrifies him, who's by far the best of that back three, and he's not a bad player at all.
No.
But this teenager makes Ayala look like a rabbit caught in the headlights of a car. It's an extraordinary performance, I think, from Michael Owen.
Yeah. Well, he was totally fearless, wasn't he? It was a bit of a cliche, but he had that fearlessness of youth. He was a child, more or less. I mean, I've got children much older than him now, that's when you really get the perspective. My kids are 21 and 23, and I'm thinking, he was 3 years younger than the youngest one. Yeah. Jesus.
Can barely cross the road on their own,
Yeah, I mean, but of course, what that can give you is complete fearlessness. He seemed to have total fearlessness for those I read a piece where someone had told him, or he just knew that he was the best player in the world of his age or type, or maybe just full stop at that point. And he played like he totally believed that. He didn't.
Do you
just
think
felt like, I can do this?
Because I remember thinking this during this game, and certainly 2 years later in the Euros. Do you think there's a problem there I suppose it's a man management thing with Alan Shearer? Because Alan Shearer is the king of the hill.
Yeah.
Isn't he? And Alan Shearer, I think preferred Sheringham to have been in.
Yeah, well, Sheringham was going to serve his needs, wasn't he?
Exactly.
Whereas Owen's out to score the goals, same as him.
Exactly. And do you because I wonder if one thing that we'll get to the sending off and so on later, but when we go a man down, I wonder if we should have made Owen just you are the one who's going to stay up all the time because your pace will terrify them.
Yeah. I mean,
but that means Shearer has to play a secondary role. They kind of swapped it around a little bit at one point, and I wonder if. But that's a huge call, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you're saying there to your main striker, you're saying you're second fiddle now.
Well, I mean, but it's the obvious thing to do. If you go down to 10 men, you can only leave one up. Who's the one you leave out? The one with the pace. I mean, that's just and so it was a political. I agree with you. It's a political hierarchical decision. Which
I saw Kevin Keegan make this same blunder in the Euros 2 years later,
right?
When we're defending a lead against Romania, and I think he takes Owen off and leaves Shearer. And I'm thinking, what on earth are you doing? You know, this is where you keep your quickest striker on when you got the counter.
Shearer had a very, very forceful personality, didn't he?
Yes.
I mean, here's the evidence of it. I think he's always been someone very, very single-minded about getting what he wanted, and of course
that's what made him such a great player.
Exactly. But sometimes it had other more unfortunate effects.
Yeah, I like to think that as we speak, that we are taking in the Argentinian perspective as well. I had a nightmare before this recording, thinking, okay, this is such a memorable game. We remember it as Englishmen. Rather than objectively. And there are a couple of moments in the game which stand out for us as Englishmen. If you look at it more objectively, this was one of the great World Cup clashes, even despite the history that had been and the history to come as well. It's bang there in the middle, but it looks like both teams want to win it and want to win it for all sorts of reasons. If we look at it from an Argentinian perspective, particularly when you talk of man management, Tim, surely they have their problems as well. Surely they have their issues as well. I think perhaps up front, it was probably more straightforward than them. They didn't have the dilemma of Shearer.
Well, they got
Owen.
Batistuta and Crespo.
Yeah. But they don't have the same dilemma, do they? Batistuta and Crespo seem to be working together for a common goal.
It's one or the other. Crespo comes on for Batistuta. Getting the two of them together was something that it was little tried and it never really worked. I don't actually think this is one of the finest hours. In fact, not the finest hours for either of them. I think Batistuta didn't have a particularly good game, and Crespo was unlucky with offside decisions when he came on, because obviously the game changed. I really lament the Beckham sending off, and to be honest, I think a yellow would have been enough. You know,
yeah. Well, you certainly wouldn't have thought how could he not have been sent off for that? If he got a yellow, everyone would have just got on with the game and not really thought about it.
And it did. Well, it changed the game because the game became a war of attrition. Then it's Argentina trying to break England down, and England having the sporadic break. I think that's a shame because the first half was just magnificent. I mean,
But how do Argentinians see it, Tim?
Well, as I was saying at the start, before you were able to join us, this was a new era and a new side. It's the side that went to the 2002 World Cup as favourites, joint with France under Marcelo Bielsa, and crashed out because they just weren't fit enough for that World Cup. So they've got a very young side coming together. It's the post Diego Maradona era. Remember the troubles that Brazil had after you lose Pelé. You know, when you lose your greatest player, unless it's Tottenham with Harry Kane, let me throw in, then you're expecting problems. So I don't really think Argentina would see themselves as going to win this World Cup. If it happens, brilliant. But there isn't quite the pressure on them that there has been in some subsequent World Cups. It's a young, promising team who, a little bit, I think they had some of their limitations exposed when they go down to 10. The defensive limitations against Michael Owen were certainly exposed. But for a while in the first, they played some wonderful football. Wonderful football. Once it goes 10 against 11, and England defended so, and Sol Campbell, he was an extraordinary player, and Tony Adams was far better than people gave him credit for.
Yeah,
you always think with Tony Adams, if he didn't have so much George Graham at the start of his career, he could have developed into a much more all-round player, because Tony Adams could play, and it is two really good sides, isn't it? Two really good sides, and my lamentation, as I say, is that with Venables still there, I think we'd have had that little bit extra.
Yeah.
So it ended up a score draw.
It's 2-2 at half time. And Theo, what was that like? Sitting on the halfway line, high up, as the ebb and flow of that first half. What was that like? I'd imagine you probably needed oxygen at the interval.
Well, it's funny you say that, because what I always say, what I remember about that, about the Owen goal, is that something got a hold of me. I'd lost control completely, and I ran the few seats to my right to the gangway, ran down to the edge of this second tier, and hung off of it with my arms in the air, just gulping the air, like as if I
like
did
a kind of Birdman.
Yeah, and it was all
Birdman of alcohol.
And it was there wasn't much alcohol involved, oddly enough. Although at that time,
it's too good a line to waste, mate.
I had to drive back to Geneva after the game. I was sober, but I was gulping the air like a man possessed, because I had never seen anything like that. And as I said, that's the second most expensive football ticket I've ever bought. The most expensive was 4 years later in Sapporo. But that was by half time, I thought, I've already had my money's worth here. This is one of the greatest spectacles I've ever witnessed. This is incredible. It already seemed to have had everything. There was more to come, obviously, more drama at least. I thought Argentina, I mean, we're obviously very partisan, but I mean, Dotun, you say, what was it like from an Argentina point of view? I did think Argentina had actually played very well. And I think the funny thing is, you go in to those games as an England fan by 1998, and my generation, where I had no memory of 66 or even 1970. So I just always expect us to lose to the big teams. So there was some stat at the time that we'd never beaten a big team in a knockout game. And I think it carried on for quite a long time. I'm not even sure we've got over it now. How many times do we beat a big team in a knockout? And so you actually go into it, regardless of other factors, what the bookies say or what objective analysis says, you think of yourselves as the complete underdogs, because you just never win those games. So when you're at 2-2 at half time in an even game that Argentina had played well in, but you've held your own, you can't believe it.
This was kind of like a cup final, a World Cup final. And it's funny what you say about Argentina, because as you've already alluded to, we were ranked higher than them, 1 point above them in the world rankings. But there's something about Argentina which you always feel, even in the recent World Cup in Qatar, every time France went in the lead, you kind of felt it's not over, Something that Argentina managed to pull out. I think they play probably the best football in the world, overall. When you see an Argentinian player playing in Europe, for example, that he is proper. Some Brazilians, they blow hot and cold. There are some Brazilians that fail.
Well, the game they played in the next round, Holland, was an even better game than this one. It's a fantastic game. Dennis Bergkamp seals it right at the end. Yeah. But Argentina had chances to seal it right at the end. And one who blows it for Argentina, who gets himself sent off, is Ortega, their number 10, who's the kind of heir apparent to Maradona.
Yeah.
But you always felt with Ortega, always felt that he's going to let you. He's one of those. He's going to let you. He should have played for Tottenham, really. You always, wonderful player, lovely player, but you always felt with him that you really put it to the test, and he's going to be just a little bit flaky, and maybe that because he has some fantastic moments in this game. He's probably the best Argentine player, but he just can't quite get them over the line. And in the end, he gets sent off at a vital moment in the fantastic game against Holland next time around.
Yeah, the point at which, as an England supporter, you realise you're probably going to lose is the penalty shootout, isn't it? That eventually, you haven't beaten 10 men, they're going to beat you. Then it always is as an England supporter, I suppose. But this time around, what was that like, Theo, going through that penalty shootout?
Oh, it's hell. It was absolute hell. And again, you go into it expecting defeat.
Yeah, of
and
course.
you're completely vindicated in the end.
Who misses first?
Yeah.
No, Argentina missed first.
That's right. So, and at that point, of course, you think, wow, this could happen here. And then the very next penalty is Paul Ince, isn't it? And he has it saved as a poor penalty. And the rest is history. But it was it wasn't one of those runaway shootouts. I think it was the 10th penalty. So in other words, England's 5th that Batty missed. If he'd put that away, it would have been sudden death. And we were on, I mean, that's the crazy thing, isn't it, about penalties?
We didn't, because of the Beckham sending off and the substitute, the need to defend.
Yeah.
Which then, becomes for like 70 minutes, it becomes England's obvious main objective. We haven't got a lot of front players on the field.
Yeah.
So you look at who takes the penalties. Shearer, Owen, Merson, and Ince. And Ince is the one who misses. So the three front players all score.
They scored well, yeah.
And I was thinking, well, Batty, why Batty? And then you look down, and there's no one else.
Yeah.
I mean, Beckham's obviously been sent off. Anderton has been subbed. Scholes has been subbed. So you're down, even with the 5th penalty, the vital 5th penalty.
Yeah,
you're down to David Seaman, the centre, and the 3 centre backs, and Gareth Southgate, who'd missed 2 years earlier. Yeah. So that's why the resources are so depleted. Poor old David Batty is stepping up to take the 5th penalty.
And Batty said
at the moment when he's stepping up, how are you feeling?
Well, I mean, at that point, you're still thinking, I mean, at the beginning of the shootout, you're thinking we're going to lose. Then you go ahead. Then they pull it back. And by that time, it's so intense that I think you think he can score. You're not writing it off at that point. You're thinking, and Batty, of course, one of the reasons it was him is because he was a hard man. And he seemed to have a real character. Spine about him. So he seemed like of what was available. All right, he wasn't like a technical player particularly. He was a decent player though. You just think he'll be all right because he's got the mettle to do this. And then he didn't. And then obviously he was interviewed about it afterwards. I remember 2 things he said. One, I'd never taken a penalty before, ever in my entire professional career. That's the first thing you remember. The second thing he said was, they said, you must be devastated. It's going to be. And he said, no, I'll block it all out. I don't particularly like football. I don't read about it. I don't watch it. I'll just go and do other stuff. I'm not that bothered, which I thought was great.
No, top credit to him. Because it never, the way that Stuart Pearce, Gareth Southgate have really suffered.
Well, they became synonymous.
It never seems to have got to him. So real credit to him.
But David Batty was fortunate in that a lot of the anger went towards David Beckham, if you remember.
Or you might say all of the anger.
All of the anger.
That's the thing that comes out in this documentary. We'd forgotten it, but it was all.
I hadn't forgotten it.
Well,
I hadn't forgotten it because it wasn't pleasant.
It was incredible. The amount of stick in this. I mean, it all came. I remembered it happened, but I'd forgotten quite how extreme it was. I mean, you had a situation where all the fans at every away game were, vile to him and accused him of letting his country down and all that. You had effigies of him hanging from things. That's right. You had the tabloids sticking the boot in constantly as well.
We know why. We know why. It was because he's married to, married at this point to.
It was a straightforward. It was about jealousy.
Oh, was his girlfriend? I think she was only his girlfriend at this point.
Yeah, they weren't married. They got married a couple of years later, but they were very much a tabloid item.
But do you remember, and this was the most embarrassing point, I thought, that Posh Spice had to come and defend him through the tabloids, the very same tabloid, saying, leave my David alone. He's a nice boy.
She's still doing it.
Well, yeah, but it was unedifying. And I think, funnily enough, looking back, and the news this week has seen the Home Secretary, surprise, surprise, coming out with orders that might actually shock people into thinking, what is it to cause an offence in Britain where she's suggesting hate crime might, you might conclude a hate crime from somebody wearing an image at a demonstration. I'm not talking about the actual incident itself. Let me leave that to one side. But the kind of images of David Beckham being hanged, for example, that were visible at football grounds, I think today would be considered a hate crime. I don't think they would have gotten away with it because it was, I mean, even looking at it turned me off football actually for a while, to be honest. But that aside, okay, so once England has lost, I know this feeling, the deflated feeling. How would you describe the mood amongst England fans?
Well, as I say, I'd been in Marseille a couple of weeks before, and there'd been a huge, massive gang fight throughout this whole big city.
Oh, yes. They still talk about that in Marseille, by the way. Yeah. Now, I mean, the last time I went was probably about 5, 6 years, maybe 8 years ago, and they were still talking about that.
I mean, it was like a full scale riot. Yes, I mean, it was like being in a war zone. We had to be rescued in a car, we all bundled. We had some local contact who, me and my brothers got rescued, but I mean, we'd have been picked off. But so you're kind of wondering if it's going to go like that. But actually, as we walked out, what I remember was England fans were just sort of in a kind of shock. And there was total despondency. And needless to say, the Argentinian fans were in absolute ecstasy and screaming and dancing and shouting. And it was one of those where everyone's head was hung low, because it was just so deflating. And the whole thing was so exhausting, emotionally exhausting. It was over 2 hours of absolute, really through the ringer. And whoever lost would have been the same, I think, would have just been absolutely sapped of energy. I then had to drive 2.5 hours into Switzerland to a hotel where they'd pretty much forgotten we were coming. And the only room left was the one specially adapted for people who were handicapped. So we had this strange room with all this equipment in it and pulleys and all. It was a really surreal experience the whole night after that. It was strange.
What happened then? Did you Dunkirk style go back to Blighty? Or were you still emotionally invested in the competition?
No, we went home because of it being France. I went in and out. I'd been to other World Cups where I've gone and stayed, but because it's France, we were in and then out the next day. So the next day we got on a flight. We had a flight, next morning in Geneva, and we were home. We were home in England by lunchtime the next day, which was, I mean,
could you feel the mood when you arrived?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it felt just complete deflation, but it just felt like in those days, and it still does to a very large extent, that this is just the same bloody movie, but with the same ending every single time. I mean, even in these last 2 or 3 years, where under Southgate, where we suddenly found a whole new level of achievement, it still ends in deflating, tragic defeat, doesn't it? Always. And it was just so.
But it's worth it.
Yeah. And
pause before the. Did you see that pause before the? Yeah,
it was a sigh. It was a deep sigh.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I'm not as invested in England now. I mean, what happened with England, as we all know, is that England. I think the fans all by the sort of mid-noughties, everyone had sort of started to think we've had enough now, because we're not sure there's enough commitment here, and these players, we're not sure how into it they are, and they underachieve habitually. And there was that period between, the end of Sven through Capello and, an old, what's his name, the Wally with the brolly, poor old McLaren and all that. And you're just thinking now. And I think lots of us never came back from that, but it's probably to do with age. If I was 30 now, like I was then, I would probably have been as into it in these last 2 or 3 tournaments as I was then, I guess. But
I think it's the players that bring you back into it, though. Suddenly England are exciting again because they've got some great players there who you think, well, I'd like to see them on a world stage. First of all, we get to see them on the Euro stage, but England have got to impress on the Euro stage, otherwise they'll be dragging dead horses all the way to the World Cup. But you see the players. England has been fortunate to always have one or two great players that you think, no, these are the ones, they're the game changers.
Unless Graham Taylor is the manager and he drops them.
For fuck's sake. Yeah. Let the guy rest in peace. For goodness sake, Tim. Anyway, that aside, he
didn't have to take the job, did he?
Mate, it's like when Real Madrid come a knocking, you don't have to sign for them. Yeah. Show me anybody who's refused. Anyway, so at the moment they've got some new players. At what point, because I believe you will come back and be as passionate as you were when you were 30, at what point, what do England have to do to get somebody like you back in the fold?
Well, I think they've done most things. Yeah, they play. I tell you one thing that, I mean, it's not particularly original thing to say. The only thing I would say about this particular vintage, and they were good in the World Cup, really good. And, I think in different times, I might have gone to that actually. If it had been a different venue, might have been part of it. But the thing is, they don't play, they could play more attacking. We were talking, you talk about attacking. I mean, look at this team that Hoddle picked. He's only got one holding midfield player in it. It's a very unusual team when you think about it. It's almost like a 4-1-5 or sort of a 3-3-4, 3-3-4 kind of very attacking, basically. Only one defensive midfielder started that game, and that was Paul Ince. Now he always picks two holding midfielders, and you think even whoever he's playing, and you just think, actually, this is a squad full of great, incredible attacking talent. And even if he picked one holder, it'd still be difficult. It'd still be sport for choice for the attacking players. I mean, he doesn't play that. I think that's the thing now. I don't think they don't. I think they play too defensively. But everyone's saying that. That's not a particularly original thing to say. But I don't think he plays.
But he wants to win something. That's the reason, isn't it? When England go defensive, they are hard to break. They are hard to break down because they're quite rigid in the old 4-4-2-ish. But it's because England demands that we're not just, potential favourites. Am I exaggerating this, do you think?
Well, I just think...
or stating the obvious, maybe.
Well, when you say he does it because he wants to win, I mean, I just think he'd have more chance of winning if he didn't do it. It's really that simple. I mean, if you look at some of the great teams and how they play now, I think it's moved on a little bit. I don't think that necessarily playing cautiously and defensively, especially when your better players are your attacking players, is the most likely. It's like, Postecoglou. I knew I'd bring him up sooner or later. Postecoglou, they say to him constantly, oh, Postecoglou is great because it's so good to watch. It's so attacking. Ange ball, it's so entertaining. And he, every now and then, doesn't say it very often, but every now and then he just does say, can I just stop you there, mate? I'm trying to win. I'm not here to just purely for entertainment. I'm not a circus. I'm trying to win.
Here. I'm here to amuse you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he wants to win, and he thinks this is the best way, his best chance of winning. And I would say that unless you happen to have, with international football, you can't buy players. You're at the mercy of what fate has dealt you. And sometimes you might have a generation of players where the defenders are the better players. Fair enough. You've got two great defensive midfielders, play them both, fine. But I don't think we're in that situation. I don't think Henderson, is... it doesn't work for me, the way he's playing.
To link this back to 1998 and to the music of the day, there's one, as someone who was abroad, I was back in for this World Cup.
Yeah.
The song that for me just sums up so many things, I think is so evocative, is Vindaloo by Fat Les.
I knew you'd say that.
I was going to make a joke. I thought you were going to say something really good, and I was going to say, what? Not Vindaloo? But you actually did say
no, but because on Vindaloo, it's a novelty record.
Yeah.
But it's serious as well.
Yeah.
And it's serious in the sense that it is an absolute celebration of multicultural England.
Yeah. Yeah.
An absolute celebration of it. And the video is hysterically funny.
Yeah.
And it's full of what the full Jordan Peterson would probably call English archetypes. It's just brilliantly funny.
Yeah.
But it's a country which seemed then so much more at ease with itself than it is now.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
To defend the multicultural project has become increasingly difficult and tiresome.
Yeah.
To defend this against what subsequently happened. Also, I would argue that the present day problems were being stored up. My vision of the country at this time, this is the Blair years, was a country that was sleepwalking. There was elements of denial of reality. And it's just living a credit-based boom, which is unsustainable. And the absolute disaster of housing policy, which was apparent to the British government in the mid-80s. If we go down this path, we are fucked. But it was politically expedient to go down that path.
Yeah.
And the Blair government never challenged that. They boosted it. So all the problems are coming. But at this point, 1998, it's easy not to see that.
It felt like a golden time, didn't it?
Yes. And I suppose certainly in comparison with, it was, although the problems are coming. But that Vindaloo record, that kind of sums up so many of the good things that the country seemed to be going through at the time, even though, as I say, a hard rain was going to fall.
Well,
yeah. Go on, you go first, because I've got something for Tim in a moment.
No, I wasn't going to say anything particularly enlightening, other than that I looked at the charts for this, and I don't know. Again, I was 30 years of age, so I wasn't particularly old. I mean, there was almost nothing in those charts that was that seemed to me of any great merit. I thought it was even though it was a golden era. We felt like we're in a golden time because we were in those first few years of that Blair government. There was growth, economic growth. Everyone seemed to be affluent, and as you say, the multicultural project was going. It seemed well, as reflected in that song. But it wasn't a good time for music. I didn't think. I couldn't believe how bad that stuff was in the charts.
It's pretty bad. It was pretty bad. Interesting enough, Tim, when you've said about Vindaloo previously, I haven't sort of understood the connection, but I'm just looking at the lyrics here for the first time ever, because all I remember was Vindaloo. But actually, I get it. I do see how it's a metaphor for the England at the time, the England that arguably was changed by football 2 years earlier, because there is a link between the multiculturalism that you talk of in 1998 and the way that the England team reclaimed for all English people the flag. They reclaimed the flag and managed to make it more appealing for people of all cultures. And you start seeing, I don't know if you saw it in Saint Etienne, but you start seeing it, don't you, in the football grounds across the Premier League. I would say beyond that, up and down the country, right through the nation, all the 4 countries in the nation, or 4 nations in the country, whichever way around it is. But that Vindaloo, I suddenly see it now. I get it, particularly that we're going to score one more than you. There was a kind of an arrogance about us at that time, not least because
I'm bloody great, me.
Yeah.
That's what it's saying.
Although we're going to score one more than you is the Kevin Keegan one, isn't it? It's kind of, that's who you think about when you hear that. And I do get it. Sorry, going back to the charts, it gets much, much, much worse, because I still think Vindaloo's a shit song, despite the fact that I do get your point about it perhaps being reflective of where we were at.
We all like Vindaloo.
Well, I don't. I do like 3 Lions, though, which is at number 1, thank goodness. Vindaloo's at number 2. C'est La Vie by Bewitched, I remember, because I think I saw their first ever TV performance, just by chance. The TV happened to be on, and these 5 young girls or young women from Ireland were doing something called C'est La Vie, Bewitched. It was an awful pop song, but I gave them their dues. At least they were doing it, at least the refrain in French. Ghetto Superstar, echoes of with Pras Michelle on it, ODB as well. Echoes, obviously, of the Fugees, because that's where he came from. It's a decent track, although it's from a movie. You might remember the movie where what's his name? Warren Beatty was a politician. I can't remember the name of the movie now. And what I was going to talk about first of all was number 6, Eagle Eye Cherry, Save Tonight. This is the son of the great jazz trumpeter Don Cherry.
Yeah, I've always wondered what Don would have made of this.
I think he would have loved it.
And what name? Because I mean, I love, although it's challenging, stuff that Don did with Ornette Coleman. You know, where it's really fucking out there, man.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
So the more pop stuff that his kids did, I always wonder what Don would have made of that.
And I'm genuinely not name dropping, but have I mentioned before that I met Don Cherry and I knew him?
But in Sweden.
Yeah. First time I met him.
You haven't actually, so I'm all ears.
No, this is really interesting.
No, this is one of your name drops I've never heard before.
Well,
and I thought there were none left.
Well, no, there's one more. There's just this one more. So I'm on a train from Stockholm. Sweden's a flipping big country. So if you're going to the south of Sweden from Stockholm, Stockholm's only halfway up, not even halfway up, really. Stockholm's about a third of the way up in the peninsula that is Sweden. But from Stockholm to the south of Sweden, you're talking about an 8-hour train ride at the very least, you know. Wow. So it's a long way away. And we take an overnight train because it's my band and we're going to record in a studio in a place called Kivik, which is better known for having a famous market once a year there. And it was the cheapest place in the whole country that we could record an album, you know, because it was out of town and it's and the guy put us up in in a farm and everything whilst we were recording for the week, I think it was. But here was the conundrum. I was effectively the producer, so I had my hands on the money, and I had to put the rest of the band in overnight sleepers, but I couldn't be in an overnight sleeper, otherwise it would have busted the budget. So I get to flipping sit on a damn train the whole journey down, and it stops at a place called Hässleholm, completely deserted. So we probably got to Hässleholm about 5 o'clock in the morning, completely deserted platform. I get out because the train's it's one of those trains that you're going to lose half of the train at this point, so you better be in the right carriages. So I had to move in any case. And I get out and go onto the platform, completely deserted. Suddenly, this cool dude appears out of nowhere in the sort of in the daybreak light of the moment, with a hat on his head, and he comes up to me, "Hey man, are you the dude I'm supposed to meet from the Stockholm train?" And I said, "Well, I was on the Stockholm train, but I'm not the dude." But he's okay. And then he was gone. It was like, oh, did that really happen? Then he was gone. And I thought to myself, that's Don Cherry. That's flipping Don Cherry. Anyway, I don't see him again then. The next time I meet him is with Ian Dury at the Roskilde Festival. Remember, the name drop was Don Cherry, not Ian Dury. I held Ian Dury back.
Yeah.
Anyway, Don
what
Cherry.
A waste.
Don Cherry is performing on the main stage at Roskilde, which is the equivalent, I suppose, the Danish equivalent of Glastonbury, or the Scandinavian equivalent, because people come from all over Scandinavia for it. He's playing on that main stage on a Saturday, I seem to remember. So I knew Don Cherry from back home. Sorry, I knew Ian Dury from back home.
Yeah.
From back home. So I'm backstage with Ian Dury chatting, and this same dude, and I'm like, fuck, do you remember Hässleholm at 5 o'clock in the morning? You came out, and it was like, oh yeah, man, it's you. Anyway, I'm standing by the side of the stage when they're playing Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, and Don Cherry turns around to me and waves me onto the stage, and I joined them for, a moment of my life on stage. And
Joe Strummer and Don Cherry invited you on stage.
I'll tell you a funny story.
That's worth an autobiography, isn't it?
Somebody from Sweden bought a copy of my book today, available at all booksellers. And of course, if you go to www.ffreeze.co.uk, no jokes about Jeffries, please, Mr. Vickery at the back. But somebody from Sweden bought my book, and he said, I remember you playing support for the Clash at the Ice Stadium. And then he added some information about a guy that used to play bass for me who has passed away recently. So it wasn't a good look. But anyway,
that's a very long preamble into
Eagle-Eyed Cherry. Eagle-Eyed Cherry.
Save Tonight by Eagle-Eyed Cherry.
Save Tonight. It stands out for me as a song in this top 10, which is a real song with real live musicians rather than programmed musicians, and a great little love song as well, by the way. It came out of nowhere. And I know Nenny Cherry, in any case, and I'm sure she's proud of her little brother like that. Came out of nowhere. He put a band together, toured the UK, and managed to get into the top 10. Not bad for him. Very good. And also, there's one more track in the top 10 that I'll mention. Well, you can mention Horny by Musi T, which is Mad, Mad, Mad.
But you're going to mention Karen Ramirez because your wife is singing on it?
No, because this is what you do when you get a brilliant song by Everything But the Girl, came out a few years before this. Brilliant song, originally by Everything and the Girl, who did it as something of a ballad. Of course, if you add an element to a great song, i.e., let's make it something that people can dance to, then you've got the formula for success right there.
And there's another one that and obviously the Fat Les, the Vindaloo thing, sums up a moment in England, but one that sums up a moment for me because it was everywhere in Brazil and probably a global soundtrack is at 11, the Brandy and Monica thing, The Boy Is Mine. Just one of those floating, ethereal R&B ballads, and I really like it. I think it's got a groove, and there's just that ethereal thing. You can't quite catch it. I think is great. I think it's really enchanting and captivating. Is there anything there that the 30-year-old Theo Delaney, or even the modern day mid-50s Theo Delaney, can connect with?
Mavericks. I like the Mavericks.
Yes, Dance the Night Away.
That not long ago. It's brilliant, isn't it?
The Beastie Boys are in there somewhere.
Never been able to take them seriously, and I'll tell you why. It's the wonderful idiot Tony Hawk, the English comedian, who when he did stutter rap,
Oh yeah, that was great.
No, sleep till bedtime. That just killed the Beastie Boys for me.
It was Morris Minor and the Miners.
That's it.
Yeah, it's
exactly
Tony
right.
Hawk.
That's good.
Yeah, that was shocking. That was shocking.
It's brilliant. The English
Asian Dub Foundation.
Yes,
the way that the English can just take the piss out of something. When rap first reached us, what's the great English response? Captain Sensible. What? He said Captain. I said what? The English are just fantastic at getting something and taking a piss out of it.
Asian Dub Foundation you mentioned, but this isn't their best one. Do you remember Buzzin'? No. Buzzin' was the big one. Do you remember that? Oh, that was amazing.
That was better, but they were good. They were good. Asian Dub Foundation. Tupac's in there somewhere.
Of course, he's got to be in there if you're talking hip hop. If anything, what Asian Dub Foundation and to a certain extent the Beastie Boys have done is allowed hip hop, rap specifically, to come out of a closet, which is, we're too cool for this. Unfortunately, LL Cool J takes it in the wrong direction and makes it a little bit soppy. But some of the others, Tupac is at 48 with Do For Love. Some of the others, Wycliffe Jean, Gone Till November, which was a great little single, but overshadowed by everything that the Fugees had done. So he didn't really get much change out of that. But suddenly rap can be hardcore because of the Beastie Boys, if nothing else. Run DMC versus Jason Nevins, which was number one. It gone to number one, been in the charts at this point for 24 weeks. Nobody had ever seen anything like this. You see, we can knock the Beastie Boys. They weren't the best rappers around, but they were they're not pioneers in any sense of the word, but they're the ones they're the troops that you send up in advance of everybody else to ruffle things up. And I don't think you'd have seen Run DMC versus Jason Nevins, which was a mix of hip hop versus high energy, or whatever you want to call it. But Jason Nevins, a kid in his bedroom remixing Run DMC, and they don't sound like hardcore rappers in this, but far from it. They're just like going with the flow. Everybody wants to dance, and they've given them a good dance tune. And it was a wicked video as well. In the midst of the sort of gang wars of hip hop, suddenly you get something that takes you back to the old school, which says, look, once upon a time, what we call battling had nothing to do with guns. It was like, go on, you throw down and show me your breakdance move, and I'll show you a better one. And that's what that captured. At number 66 it is now, after peaking at number 1. Yeah, the music is shit, but there's one or two moments of positive reflection for me in this charts.
Loads of boy bands, isn't it? That's the wave of the moment, isn't it? The boy band.
Yeah, Frank Sinatra was the ultimate boy solo singer of his day, and he's at number 84 with My Way. Don't know if he had died at this point or something like that, why it should be back in the charts. But, you know, yeah, and then there's some real shit. There's some real shit.
Yeah, really appalling.
I'm not going to mention Robbie Williams.
Okay.
But some people just can't sing. And Let Me Entertain You is at number 86, and Angels is at number 96.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to say anything against Angels, are we, Theo?
Well, it has been it has been rehabilitated, you might say. But I never liked it until about 2 months ago. Now, the bloke who wrote it is a friend of mine. Weirdly.
Oh, well, I love it.
Luckily, he doesn't like football.
I love the song. I never said anything about the song.
Okay.
I said about the singer.
It's the singer. Okay.
Where Let Me Entertain You, he can get away with it because
it's quite shouty.
Exactly. He's doing Little Richard there. You know, is Little Richard a great singer or is he not a great singer? Well, who cares as long as he brings the energy in?
Talking of criticism, I love this story. Another World Cup record is going down the charts because Scotland have already gone out, and that's Delaney. And Don't Come Home Too Soon. And Don't Come Home Too Soon is the opposite of what a football song should be. Instead of okay, the new we're going to win. It's, just don't humiliate us. Very strange football song.
Well, I mean, that negativity I was talking about that England had, this takes it into a whole other level, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I remember seeing a fella from Delaney on talking about it on the TV, and he said shortly after it came out, he's in some pub in Glasgow, and some old Scottish guy comes up to him and said, "Hey Jimmy, are you responsible for that?" And may the Lord have mercy on your soul.
He's Irish, that
bloke. He's a Nigerian Swede.
Of course he is. Quick shout out for the late, could have been great if he'd had more time in life, Lyndon David Hall, number 45 with Crescent Moon. There he's sounding just like D'Angelo. I don't think it's his best look, but he just was taken away from us far too early, and he was the UK, soul prince at one point, new soul prince, that is. It fills me with a lot of sadness to hear it, not just because he's gone, but because this is the record company telling him, look, here's D'Angelo's Brown Sugar, now do exactly the same. Right. I think he was a much more creative artist, and if you saw him live you'd have known that. But sadly this is his epitaph. I think
that this entire conversation, everything that happened on the field, everything that's happened culturally, it can kind of be summed up by the chorus of the Des'ree hit. Life, oh life, oh life.
Don't take the mickey. Do not take the mickey. This song also has, and I said it to her. I interviewed her after this, and I said to Des'ree, I said, no, that wasn't a name drop. I said she arrived with in the interview in this sort of it was like this people carrier, and she had like this big black guy was her chauffeur, and it was like drizzling a little bit. He opened the door for her, and he had an umbrella waiting for her, and he escorted her to the door. It was all like that. Anyway, I said to her, come off it, Des'ree. That line about a slice of breakfast toast, can't remember what she rhymes it with, a ghost, a toast, something like that. I said, come off it, Des'ree. And she said, yeah, you say that, but guess which is the one line that everybody remembers? And then I realized, it's not about whether we think it's a shit couplet or not. It's about, let me put something in that will make this song memorable.
I cross the
Check out the
stream.
lyrics.
I have a dream.
Something like that.
ABBA once.
To put Desiree in the same category, she'll be delighted.
Yeah. Take that.
Yeah, exactly.
Life.
Mate,
Oh, life. Oh,
yes,
life
okay.
goals with Theo
think-
Delaney.
Well, exactly.
I should adapt it.
I was going to say, Theo, that is Tim's cue to say, look, we've talked enough for tonight.
And we haven't plugged Theo's podcast.
Let's
Theo,
go.
plug
Go.
away.
Well, Life Goals with Theo Delaney, a podcast you're both familiar with. I'm delighted. You two are two of my very, very favourite editions of Life Goals with.
His stories were better, but my music is superior.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. Yeah.
Well-known football fans relive the defining goals of their lives. I've done over 200 now. You guys were in the early days. Over 200. There's something for everyone in there. Imagine the array.
I was in short trousers when you did mine. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, all the people you've met since, Dotun, that you can talk.
This is true. This is true. A return match is always welcome. Let me know when.
Okay, I will.
It's been an absolute delight having you with us, though. Theo Delaney from Life Goals with Theo Delaney, Tim Vickery from Live. Oh, live. Oh, live.